These are some of the ugliest cars built in the 1970s. In a decade of dreadful design, some cars were worse than others. Between the big hair, the wide ties, and the gaudy vehicles was not exactly a high point for design of any kind.
This year, 9 million of you Americans will buy a car, probably from one of the three big car companies, without even considering American Motors. Now that's a shame. Last April, we came out with a Gremlin, an American car that met the economy imports head on. Nobody had ever done that before.
We began with the 1970 AMC Gremlin. The Gremlin sold for 2/3 the cost of most small cars, which is appropriate because it looked like 2/3 of a car. Truth be told, the Gremlin was a stroke of corporate genius. Cheap to develop and right for the times. And it was a runaway sales success, at least by AMC's modest standards.
Wow, what's that? It's a Gremlin! Yeah, get in it.
But did it have to be so ugly? It could have been worse. AMC considered a shortened version of the Hornet that design chief Dick Teague said was even uglier. Though, considering that he signed off on the Gremlin, we're not sure his opinion can be trusted.
Riviera, 1966 Riviera. One of the tuned cars from Buick. Styling, performance, ride and handling, all tuned to work together. 1966 Riviera. See and test drive it now at your Buick dealers.
Next up on the ugliest cars of the 70s is the 1970 Buick Riviera. The second-generation Buick Riviera was a breathtakingly beautiful car, at least from 1966 until 1969, with its racy lines and inboard hidden headlights. And then this happened. It takes a moment to appreciate just how ugly this car is, probably because of the mind's defensive mechanism of blocking out extreme trauma. But look long enough and you'll see it. The way the grille seems to be sliding down off the front of the car. The way the skirted rear fenders seem to be growing over the wheels like runaway mold.
This is the 1971 Buick Riviera. You won't find anything like it anywhere else. Maybe that's reason enough to buy it.
Mercifully, it was replaced by the controversial but beautiful boat-tail Riviera in 1971. Hey, at this point, we'd like to take a second to thank all our subscribers and to those of you who are viewing this video right now. Don't forget we have merch for sale. Yes, all kinds of car t-shirts. If you're a car enthusiast like we are, then check out the link in our description and find out how you can get yourself a nice t-shirt. Again, thanks for subscribing and watching this video. Now, back to the ugliest cars of the 70s.
Introducing the great new birds of 1970, Pan Am's new Boeing 747, and the great new 1970 Thunderbird, with its daring new grille, executive control panel, and an interior where, as far as luxury goes, the sky's the limit.
Next, we find ourselves with the 1970 Ford Thunderbird. The late 60s T-Birds were, if not exactly pretty cars, certainly not offensive. And then 1970 came along and Ford decided to stick a giant beak on the front. Seriously, Ford, what the? The emphasis should be on a thunder, not a bird. Next is the 1970 Porsche 914. It's difficult to design a well-proportioned mid-engine car, though we'd argue that Chevrolet has finally done it. But there's more to the Porsche's 914's strangest than the huge expanse of space between the B-pillar and the rear wheel. There's just something about the 914. Its awkwardly swept-back greenhouse, its super square, squared-off bodywork, its relatively unadorned lines, that makes it not only a dorky-looking car, but one that has accepted its dorkiness. We're not saying that dorkiness is unappealing. We love the 914, but we think a Porsche should be styled like a car you dream about, not the reality you wake up to. Find out what the next ugliest car of the 70s is after this.
Ford introduces Mustang 2, the right car at the right time. Because it's small, even smaller than the original Mustang, but built with jewel-like quality, unexpected luxury.
Next up is the 1974 Ford Mustang II Ghia. We'll skip the debate about whether the downsized Mustang II was a stroke of genius or a national tragedy. That's a conversation for another time. Sure, the Mustang II looked silly, but the major visual offense was the luxury-themed Ghia model, a victim of Ford's notion that any car could be made better with the addition of opera windows. It was one thing to shrink the Stang, but attempting to give it a luxury vibe with a padded vinyl, formal roof, and color-keyed bumpers was nothing less than a crime against humanity. And did they think we wouldn't notice that the hubcaps were lifted from the Granada? Come on! The Mustang II was a strong seller, but we think this was in spite of the Mustang Ghia rather than because of it.
Mrs. Fitzhorgan, it's on the way. Lou, bring everything. Let's go. Quick, Lou. Hurry. Don't forget the provolone.
Fortunately for the Sandwich King, he had a new AMC Pacer. Fortunately, because the Pacer is wider than any other small car. So he had enough room to work on his giant creations.
Next is the 1975 AMC Pacer. Ah, the Pacer. The first wide small car. AMC's concept did make for some cute commercials, but it also made for a seriously unattractive car. The Pacer's huge glass area was designed to give drivers better visibility, but instead it made them feel like a goldfish being boiled in its own bowl. Out back, the taillights looked like they were designed with a cake frosting spatula. The Pacer got even uglier in 1978. AMC fitted a bulging hood and stand-up grille that provided clearance for the new optional V8. An attempt to give the Pacer the power it needed to move all that heavy glass, with no worries about the economy since the cast-iron six-cylinder engines were already gluttons. Poorly conceived and poorly executed, the Pacer was a car for dorks before dorks were cool. Next, on the ugliest cars of the 70s, the 1977 Volvo 262C. Hemmings reports that when Henry Ford II came to Sweden to see Volvo's cutting-edge Kalmar plant, his team brought a phalanx of Lincoln Continental Mark IVs to drive around. And the Swedes were so taken that they decided to build their own version, a stupid idea that began a stupid car. The story goes that Volvo didn't bother with any clay model, and that's too bad. Perhaps it would have stopped this disaster before it happened. To create this rolling horror, Volvo sent perfectly good 262 GL coupes to Bertone in Italy, which chopped 2.6 inches from the roofline and rendered the car unusable for anyone over 6 feet tall. Amazingly, some 6,600 were built over a 5-year period. Apparently, there's a lot of short people with bad taste.
Why are people buying Buick's new Century? Well, it depends on who you ask.
I have a son of 16 who has very long legs. He's 6 foot tall, and he says that it's the most marvelous thing he's ever got in and out of for a backseat of a car. Very comfortable.
Last but not least on our list of the ugliest cars of the 70s is the 1978 Buick Century / Oldsmobile Cutlass Aeroback. When the time came to downsize its successful mid-size cars, General Motors decided that Buick Century and Oldsmobile Cutlass ought to have a European look. And what could be more European than a hatchback? The results, as you can see, were predictably awful. Technically, the Aeroback cars weren't hatchbacks, as they had a conventional trunk lid, but consumers didn't complain because they were too busy not buying them. GM was so confident in the design that it didn't bother to offer a traditional sedan version. Whoops! Sales tanked thanks to the conventional wagon and rather attractive coupe. GM rushed If you're wondering why GM styling was so bland throughout the 1980s, well, now you know. Well, there you have it, some of the ugliest cars of the 1970s. We hope you enjoyed this list. If you have one to throw in, leave us a comment below. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that bell for future video notifications. Again, thanks for watching the Boca Brothers Car Reviews.